All right. So, welcome everyone to Cortex Conversations Encore Talk in our Brain Health series. So, we actually presented this talk last month, but due to high demand, we decided to present this again for anyone who may have missed the previous talk or for any new people who may be interested. So, to introduce myself, my name is Harleen, and I'm currently working at the Sunnybrook Research Institute with Dr. Rabin. I'm assisting in a project that looks at the risk and protective factors for dementia in diverse communities, and specifically looking into Chinese and South Asian communities. Cortex Conversations is a group that was created by Dr. Rabin and I. We both have a passion for science communication, so relaying important scientific findings back to the community so that they can be applied in our everyday lives. We found that the easiest and probably most accessible way to do this was to just host our own free talks about brain health, whether that is in person or online. And now to introduce Dr. Rabin. So she is a registered clinical neuropsychologist, a scientist at Sunnybrook Research Institute, and an assistant professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of Toronto. So after earning her PhD in clinical neuropsychology from York University, she completed her internship and a 3-year fellowship at Harvard Medical School. In 2019, she started the Cognitive Brain Health Lab at Sunnybrook, where she now continues to conduct research on a wide variety of things, including what we'll be talking about today, which is Alzheimer's disease. So I'll pass the floor now to Dr. Rabin to get started with her presentation. I'm also just going to ask to please keep yourselves muted and save your questions for the discussion portion of today's talk. If you feel like you might forget your question, then feel free to just type it into the chat and we can address that during the Q&A portion. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Harleen, and thank you everyone for joining tonight. I'm very excited that you're here and to talk about brain health in diverse communities with a focus on Alzheimer's disease. So just as our bodies age, our brains age as well. The brain controls all aspects of our thinking abilities, including paying attention, remembering, problem solving, language abilities, and more. And because our brains change with age, it's completely normal to experience changes to our thinking abilities as we get older. So here I'm going to talk about some examples of normal thinking changes that occur with age. One that I'm sure many of us can relate to is being slower to find words or names. I'm sure we've all had the experience where we struggle to find a specific word, an actor or actress's name, or the name of someone we don't see often. Minor memory lapses are also quite common as we get older. This might include forgetting to pay a bill once in a while, misplacing items such as glasses, keys, or our phones, or forgetting why we walked into a room. Attention lapses are also become more common as we get older. I'm sure many of us have left the house and wondered whether we locked the door, right? I call this an attention problem rather than a memory problem, because in most cases, we can't remember if we locked the door because of a lapse in our attention rather than a lapse in our memory. Most of the time when we do routine activities, such as locking the door, we don't pay attention because we don't need to. It's an easy task and we've done it a million times. So we really don't need to devote any mental resources to this. But later, when we go to retrieve this information, we can't recall it because we didn't pay attention to it in the first place. So to prevent this from happening, the next time you go lock the door, say to yourself, now I'm locking the door. So this will help you direct your attention to the task, and you'll be much more likely to remember that you locked the door. I also briefly wanted to highlight some changes in thinking abilities that are not normal as we get older. So this includes things like forgetting the names of loved ones or people that we see often, getting lost in familiar places, asking the same questions over and over again despite getting an answer each time, difficulty completing familiar or daily tasks, such as getting dressed or making a cup of coffee if that's something you do every day, and changes in personality. So maybe becoming more aggressive or acting inappropriate, such as laughing at a funeral or telling jokes at a funeral. Now, while a mild decline in our thinking abilities is a normal part of aging, more significant thinking changes, such as those discussed on the previous slide, might be a sign of dementia. Dementia is not a single disease. Instead, it's an overall term, or what I like to call an umbrella term, used to describe a decline in thinking abilities that is severe enough to interfere with one's day-to-day activities. And by day-to-day activities, I mean things like cooking, managing medications, driving, dressing, and so on. So the term dementia refers to a set of symptoms and says nothing about what's causing the decline in thinking abilities. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, and I think that's why it's so often confused with the term dementia. However, they mean different things. So Alzheimer's disease is the disease that's causing dementia, or a decline in thinking abilities that's severe enough to impact daily functioning. And as you can see here, Alzheimer's disease is not the only cause of dementia. There's actually many causes of dementia, but today I'm going to specifically focus on Alzheimer's disease. Now, there's many misconceptions about dementia, and I wanted to take a few moments to address some of these. So dementia is not a normal or inevitable part of aging. And as I just explained, dementia results from specific diseases that affect the brain, such as Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia, rather than from the aging process itself. And contrary to popular belief, the majority of older adults actually do not develop dementia. Now, in some communities, there's misconceptions that dementia is caused by karma, divine punishment, or the influence of spirits or demons. However, these beliefs are not supported by scientific evidence. Such myths perpetuate stigma, shame, and embarrassment surrounding dementia. And unfortunately, because of this, individuals and families may try to hide symptoms and avoid seeking medical help or support from family and friends. Cultural beliefs and attitudes can significantly shape the perception of dementia in communities. In many cultures, the terms used to describe dementia often carry negative connotations. For instance, words like senility, lunacy, or loss of identity are used in some cultures to describe or refer to dementia. And this type of terminology can again lead to feelings of shame, embarrassment, and isolation, once again causing families to hide symptoms and avoid seeking medical help. And so there really is a great need to address the stigma linked to dementia. And I think by educating ourselves and others, we can start to dismantle these barriers, the barriers created by misinformation and stigma. And this will ensure that people living with dementia, along with their families, receive the respect, care, and support they rightfully deserve. So I just want to thank you all again for being here today and for your commitment to learning about dementia. So let's talk about Alzheimer's disease specifically. Alzheimer's disease is defined by the abnormal buildup of two proteins in the brain. So one is called amyloid and the other is called tau. So you can see these two proteins in the brain of someone who passed away with Alzheimer's disease. So these orange clumps are the amyloid plaques, and these black stringy things are the tau tangles. Now, while there is a lot of debate in the literature about the exact cause of Alzheimer's disease, most researchers believe that the disease unfolds in a stereotypical way. And so the accumulation of amyloid is thought to be the earliest event in the disease process. So the buildup of amyloid then leads to the accumulation and spreading of tau, that other hallmark pathology of Alzheimer's disease. Tau is very toxic to the brain and causes brain cells to die. This leads to tissue loss throughout the brain. And this tissue loss results in cognitive decline and eventually dementia. So the plot I'm showing you here describes the trajectory of normal aging and the trajectory of Alzheimer's disease dementia. Okay, so on this bottom line here, I'm representing time in years. So as we go along here, this is increasing time. And on the y-axis here, I'm representing cognitive functioning with lower values here representing worse cognition. The solid black line here represents the trajectory of normal aging, and the dotted line represents the trajectory of Alzheimer's disease. Now, in normal aging, you can see that there's a decline in thinking and memory skills over time, but it's not quite as severe as what we see in Alzheimer's disease dementia. Now, we now know that amyloid and tau, those hallmark proteins or pathologies of Alzheimer's disease, begin to accumulate in the brain at least 15 to 20 years before an individual presents with significant memory decline or dementia. So this means that by the time someone's diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease by their physician, they've likely already had the disease for more than a decade. And we know from other diseases like cancer and stroke that treatments are most effective when they're administered early in the course of disease. So for example, with cancer, we don't wait to intervene until someone has reached stage 4. Early detection and treatment are crucial for achieving the best outcomes. And we really need to take the same approach in Alzheimer's disease. So before we put together this talk for this evening, I received some questions in our survey about genetics and Alzheimer's disease. So I added a slide on this topic to address it in a very comprehensive way. So one well-known gene that influences Alzheimer's risk is the ApoE gene. And ApoE comes in several forms called alleles, and each person has 2 alleles, okay? So ApoE3 is the most common allele, and it's neutral in relation to risk for Alzheimer's disease. ApoE4 is less common and is associated with an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease, particularly in non-Hispanic white populations. And ApoE2 is the least common allele and is associated with the lowest risk of Alzheimer's disease. Now, I want you to know that the presence of an E4 allele cannot predict for sure whether someone will develop Alzheimer's disease. So many people who have the E4 allele do not get Alzheimer's disease, and many people who do not have the gene or the allele still develop the disease. And because of this, physicians do not consider ApoE4 testing a necessary or a useful part of evaluating a person with suspected Alzheimer's disease. So most people are unaware of their ApoE4 status, including myself. Now, a very small number of people who get Alzheimer's disease have what we call autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease. And this means that 100% you're going to get the disease if you have one of these genes. And there are 3 genes associated with this type of Alzheimer's disease: a gene called amyloid precursor protein, another gene called presenilin-1, and another gene called presenilin-2. Now, these genes run very strongly in families, and most families who carry this gene have been well identified. And so it's likely the case that if your family has these genes, you would know about them. And as I mentioned before, 100% of cases with these genes will develop Alzheimer's disease. All right, so let's come to some good news. So we now know that dementia can be prevented or delayed by making certain lifestyle changes. And when I talk about lifestyle changes, I mean making changes in our daily habits that can significantly enhance our brain health. So these changes include improving our vascular health or our heart health, physical activity, so engaging in physical activity and getting our heart rates up, eating a healthy diet, engaging in cognitively stimulating activities or keeping our minds active, getting enough sleep, and staying socially active. Now, I wanted to pose a question to you. What percentage of dementia cases do you think are due to lifestyle factors, such as those I mentioned on the previous slide? So you'll see a survey pop up on your screen, and please take your best guess as to what percent of dementia cases you think are due to lifestyle factors. I'll just give it a moment here. All right, so I'm going to try to share this poll. Oh, we still have some more answers coming in. Okay. Okay, I'm not sure if everyone can see that. Um, but actually, we have a very intelligent audience tonight. So the most common response was 40%, which is exactly right. So about 40% of dementia cases could potentially be prevented through lifestyle changes. And I think that's huge, 40% of cases. Just think about that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss each of these factors and the specific changes that we can make to improve our brain health and reduce the risk of dementia. So let's start with vascular health. When I say vascular health, I really mean the health of our blood vessels. Healthy blood vessels are crucial for maintaining good blood flow to the brain. And healthy blood flow ensures that the brain receives the oxygen and nutrients it needs to function properly. Poor vascular health is caused by conditions that affect the blood vessels. These vascular conditions include high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity, diabetes, and smoking. And each of these conditions on their own can increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And when they present together, they can increase the risk in a much greater manner. So how do vascular conditions lead to dementia? The brain is outfitted with a rich supply of blood vessels, which are necessary for the delivery of oxygen and nutrients. It's estimated that the adult human brain contains approximately 400 miles of blood vessels. And the further and deeper into the brain the vessels penetrate, the smaller they become. And these small blood vessels are incredibly vulnerable to vascular conditions. And with extended exposure to these conditions, these vessels can start to harden and thicken. And when the blood vessels harden and thicken, it can reduce blood flow to the brain and cause brain cells to die. And this in turn affects memory and thinking abilities and can lead to dementia. I also wanted to mention that reduced blood flow to the brain can also cause the buildup of amyloid and tau, those Alzheimer's proteins I talked about earlier. These proteins also cause brain cells to die, leading the brain to shrink at a faster pace, which in turn exacerbates cognitive decline and creates a faster progression to dementia. Now, interestingly, a large body of research shows that vascular health varies significantly among different ethnic groups in Canada. For example, studies have found that relative to white Canadians, South Asian Canadians have higher rates of high blood pressure, high cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, and stroke. Relative to white individuals, Chinese Canadians have higher rates of high blood pressure and tend to be more susceptible to bad cholesterol. And relative to white Canadians, Black individuals have higher rates of high blood pressure at younger ages, as well as high cholesterol. And we know that poor vascular health contributes to dementia. And because of this, we might expect that dementia rates would be higher in these ethnic groups compared to their white counterparts. Now, while we don't have any data on Black Canadians, studies from the United States suggest that the prevalence of dementia is 2 times higher among African American individuals compared to their white counterparts. And this is thought to be partly due to the higher rates of vascular conditions in Black individuals, which is likely ultimately related to social determinants of health. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any data on dementia prevalence rates in South Asian or Chinese Canadians, and so this currently remains unknown. However, this is an area of focus for me and my lab, and I'm going to come back to this at the end of my presentation. Now, the good news is that we know how to treat vascular conditions. We've really known this for a long time. We know how to treat high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, and obesity, and we have effective strategies to help people quit smoking. So you might be wondering what you can do to preserve your vascular health. So here I'm providing some recommendations. So one is to keep up with routine doctor visits. So this will help these conditions to be monitored and effectively treated if needed. If you've been prescribed medication for high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or diabetes, please take these medications as directed. So this will ensure that they work most effectively. We also know that adopting a nutritious diet and engaging in regular physical activity can benefit your vascular health. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about these in the next few slides. All right, so next I'm going to focus on physical activity. So I think most people know that physical activity enhances physical fitness. It's beneficial for the lungs, overall body health, and maintaining a healthy waistline. However, it's also good for the brain. Physical activity can significantly benefit the brain in several ways. So for one, it increases blood flow to the brain. And as I previously mentioned, increased blood flow means that more oxygen and nutrients reach the brain, which in turn promotes overall brain health. Physical activity is also known to stimulate growth factors in the brain. So you can kind of think of these growth factors as vitamins for the brain. And so these vitamins or growth factors support the survival of existing brain cells and also encourage the growth of new brain cells and connections. Physical activity also helps to lower stress levels. This is really important because high stress levels create high levels of bad hormones. So stress hormones like cortisol, can be quite harmful to the brain and particularly harmful to the memory centers of the brain. Physical activity also improves mood. So moving your body promotes the production of endorphins, which are natural mood lifters. So this is important because depression is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So engaging in physical activity can make you feel better and protect you from Alzheimer's disease. And most importantly, there are no negative side effects. So when it comes to physical activity, you don't need to be a marathon runner or professional athlete to reap the benefits. Even as little as 10 minutes of physical activity a day can have beneficial effects on the brain. So researchers don't really know the optimal amount of physical activity that one should engage in, but typically more is better, but doing something is better than nothing. And researchers really recommend finding activities that you enjoy. This is because you are much more likely to stick with an exercise regimen if you enjoy it. So you might want to opt for activities that you can do with other people, like walking or dancing. And this is because social activities are also good for the brain, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. Social activities also serve as a good way to encourage one another to exercise more often. So the next time you get together with a friend, you might want to suggest going for a walk rather than sitting and having tea or coffee, or at least going for a walk to get a cup of tea or coffee. And the last thing I want to mention here is that household chores such as cleaning and vacuuming can also be excellent ways to incorporate physical activity into your daily routine. And it's really a win-win situation because not only do you get a workout, but your house gets cleaned at the same time. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about diet. So there's many studies now that suggest that what we eat can have a significant impact on our brain health. So how does our diet affect our brains? So healthy foods can reduce harmful processes in the brain like inflammation and oxidative stress. Healthy foods can also provide nutrients that protect the brain from harmful substances such as those Alzheimer's disease proteins I talked about earlier. A healthy diet can also help control conditions like diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol, which we now all know are bad for the brain. So what should we be eating? The Mediterranean diet is often hailed for its numerous health benefits, including reducing the risk of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. It typically includes plenty of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, olive oil, as well as fish, And it suggests that red meat and processed foods should be limited. It's also essential to be mindful of foods that aren't so great for the brain. So fried foods, while delicious, are not good for our blood vessels or for our brains. Excessive salt intake has been linked to high blood pressure, which now we all know can negatively impact brain health. Alcohol can also have a negative impact on brain health and increase the risk of dementia. So it's advisable to limit its consumptions. I know in the media, there's been some talk that having some glasses of red wine can be helpful for the brain. But I think what most of the newer data show that it's better to get the benefits from those benefits from red wine from other sources and rather to limit alcohol as much as possible. And finally, sugar and sugary drinks have also been shown to increase dementia risk. So the ways in which sugar increases dementia risk is not really well known. However, sugar is thought to lead to rapid rises in blood glucose and insulin. And there is also data from animal studies showing that sugar can increase amyloid and tau, those Alzheimer's proteins. All right, so now moving on to cognitive stimulation. So let me introduce you to Sister Mary. So Sister Mary was enrolled in a study in 1986 that examined thinking abilities in a group of nuns. And nuns were chosen as subjects in this study because of their similar and relatively clean lifestyles, making it easier for researchers to isolate the factors that influence memory and thinking abilities. Sister Mary was passionate about education, and she continued teaching well after her official retirement at the age of 84. She was an avid reader, very social, and remained heavily involved in community activities until she died. When Sister Mary passed at the age of 101, her brain autopsy showed advanced Alzheimer's disease. So her brain was filled with those amyloid plaques and tau tangles I showed you earlier. Now, at the time, this was very surprising because until the very end of Sister Mary's life, her scores on memory and thinking tests were better than those of adults 30 years younger. And so these findings led the researchers to conclude that keeping your mind active throughout your whole life can help protect the brain against diseases like Alzheimer's disease. And these findings have now been replicated over and over and over again. And because of these findings, researchers now recommend keeping your mind active throughout your whole life, and especially after you retire. It's not entirely clear which activities are most beneficial for the brain. And so researchers recommend engaging in any challenging activity that you enjoy. Like I mentioned with physical activity, finding activities that you enjoy increases the likelihood that you'll do it consistently, which will help keep your brain sharp. So these activities can include anything from playing challenging games, such as cards, bridge, or chess, reading a book, knitting or crocheting, socializing with family and friends, or attending a lecture like you're all doing today. Now, I often get the question about whether individuals should engage in something like Lumosity or computer games that are designed for thinking and memory abilities. And there's actually, what the research shows is there's nothing really special about these games or activities. So they're really just as good as anything else. So I would say that if you like these brain games, continue to play them. But if you force yourself to play them, thinking that it's going to really benefit your brain much more than other activities, then stop. There's really not good evidence to support that. In fact, if you start to get stressed when you're doing those brain games, you're actually doing yourself a disservice. So best to find something you enjoy. So now I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about sleep. So I think we all know that a poor night's sleep can leave us feeling groggy and unfocused the next day. However, chronic poor sleep can increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And scientists believe that during sleep, the brain clears away harmful waste products that accumulate throughout the day. So you can kind of think of it like a dishwasher or a car wash that turns on at night. Now, among the waste products that the brain removes during sleep are those harmful Alzheimer's disease proteins I talked about earlier. So you can think of sleep like tidying up your house after a busy day. So while you sleep, your brain gets to work cleaning out the clutter and ensuring everything is in order for the next day. And when we don't get enough sleep, this cleaning process might not happen as effectively, allowing harmful proteins to build up over time. So if you've fallen asleep during this lecture, you're actually doing your brain a favor. And if you're still paying attention, then you're actively stimulating your brain. So either way, it's a win-win situation. So I thought I would provide a few sleep tips for good sleep hygiene. So the sleep neurologists and sleep doctors recommend going to bed at the same time each night and getting up at the same time each morning. So this helps your circadian rhythm stay in check and make sure that your melatonin, the sleep hormone, is working at the right times and the same times every day. These doctors also recommend making sure that the bedroom is quiet, dark, and at a comfortable temperature, probably a little bit cooler than you think, like in the high 60s. So these are thought to be the optimal conditions for a good night's sleep. Physicians also recommend avoiding using electronic devices 2 to 3 hours before going to sleep. This can include iPads, iPhones, watching TV, and so on. So all of these devices emit a blue light that actually stimulates the wake centers of the brain and makes it harder for us to fall asleep and to stay asleep. These sleep doctors recommend avoiding caffeine after noon. So caffeine actually has a really long half-life, meaning that it stays in our bodies long after we consume it. And finally, engaging in physical activity during the day can reduce the time it takes to fall asleep at night and lead to better and deeper sleep. And I just wanted to mention that we tend to clean out the Alzheimer's proteins from our brains during that very deep stage 4 sleep. So that's really what you want to aim for. So the last risk factor that I'm going to talk about today is staying socially active. So research has shown that persistently feeling lonely can have detrimental effects on the brain. Researchers are still exploring the precise mechanisms or why loneliness leads to an increased risk of dementia. One reason is that scientists believe that loneliness can lead to depression and stress, which plays significant roles in this connection. So on the flip side, maintaining strong social connections and staying socially active has been linked to a reduced risk of dementia. Effective strategies to enhance social connectedness include joining clubs or groups, attending community events, taking classes, volunteering, and spending more time with family and friends. And I think as people get older, they tend to withdraw a little bit and find it more difficult to reach out to family and friends. But I think it's really important to maintain these connections and to make the effort to see other people as often as possible. Now, multi-generational homes, which are common among many communities, really offer a built-in solution to combat loneliness and promote social engagement. With multiple generations living under one roof, there are constant opportunities for meaningful social interactions and emotional support. And this really could be an under-identified protective factor in people who live in these homes. And this is something that we're going to look at in some of our studies, which I'm going to talk about next. So in the last few minutes, I want to talk about some of the research that's currently going on in my lab and at Sunnybrook. So Canada is one of the most diverse countries in the world. And yet in Canada, risk factors for cognitive impairment, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease have mostly been studied in white samples. In Canada, the largest non-white ethnic groups include individuals of South Asian descent and individuals of Chinese descent, as you can see here. Despite these groups being among the largest and fastest growing ethnic groups in Canada, they are significantly underrepresented in Alzheimer's disease and dementia research. So this led us to launch the CAMERA study, which stands for the Canadian Multi-Ethnic Research on Aging Study. And this is currently being carried out at Sunnybrook here in Toronto. And this study is being carried out in collaboration with Magid Gubran, an imaging scientist here at Sunnybrook, as well as Dr. Sandra Black, a world-renowned neurologist and Alzheimer's expert. And the aim of the CAMERA study is to better understand aging and risk factors for dementia through an inclusive lens that captures Canadians from different backgrounds. And so in this study, we're specifically focusing on individuals of Chinese descent, South Asian descent, and we're also including white individuals. The idea is to include 100 individuals per group. We're recruiting individuals between the ages of 55 and 85 years old with no significant memory difficulties. And the reason for this is because we're really interested in understanding the earliest changes that occur. Because as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, when we intervene, we need to do it early. And so we really need to know what the earliest changes are and the markers that predict significant decline over time. So a benefit of participating in our study as opposed to other studies is that while our testing is done in English, for those who would like it, we are offering support in several other languages, including Hindi, Punjabi, and Mandarin. And the goal is to expand this to other languages as we continue to grow. And we're very fortunate to receive funding for this study through multiple funding agencies, including the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, the Alzheimer's Society of Canada, and the Alzheimer's Association in the United States. So in the CAMERA study, participants undergo sophisticated brain scans to gain insight into subtle brain changes. We also do a blood draw to examine vascular and inflammatory markers that might differ across ethnic groups. We administer participants a broad range of cognitive tests to evaluate different aspects of cognition, including memory, problem solving, visual spatial processing, and speed. We ask our participants to complete a lot of different questionnaires, and this is so that we can gather information on community factors, lifestyle factors, and demographic factors that might influence dementia risk in these ethnic groups. We're monitoring vital signs to collect data on key health indicators like blood pressure, and we're giving participants an actigraphy or a watch-like device to monitor sleep patterns and physical activity objectively. And so the CAMERA study has established a community advisory board, which consists of community members who share similar backgrounds with our participants. And these board members actively contribute their thoughts, experiences, and insights to ensure that our study authentically reflects and addresses the needs of South Asian and Chinese communities. And already we've had one formal meeting and many informal meetings where participants have given us feedback on questionnaires that we should be including or things that we should be doing different. And we're always happy to incorporate this feedback as much as possible and change our study design because of it. So if you are interested in serving on this board, please do send me an email. I'll have my email up at the end of the talk. So we've been fortunate to have many participants interested in this study. And so we're almost at 50% of our goal of individuals who identify as Chinese. We have 38 of our targeted 100 of those who identify as South Asian, and again, almost half of individuals who identify as white. I will mention that we are submitting a grant to increase these numbers. So the hope is that this study will receive more funding so that we can recruit even more individuals. Now, there's many benefits of participating, and I think that's why we've been so fortunate to receive so many emails from interested participants. So for one, all the scans that participants, so as I mentioned, all our participants undergo a scan, and a neuroradiologist reviews all the MRI scans. If there's any abnormal results, we of course contact the participant, and with their permission, the family doctor. We send these results to the family doctor, but also help to expedite referrals within the Sunnybrook system so that the participant can be seen as quickly as possible by a specialist. All the blood results that we collect, the standard blood results, are reviewed by a nurse practitioner. If there's any abnormal findings, a nurse practitioner or someone from our team will reach out to the participant. With their permission, again, we'll share the results with the family doctor and also provide recommendations if requested. Cognitive results. As a neuropsychologist, I'm very happy to go through the cognitive results that of the data that we collect. And if this isn't requested, but we do find some results that are concerning, of course, this is shared with participants. And again, we try to expedite referrals. Participants are compensated for their time. We also provide snack vouchers and parking passes for each in-person visit at Sunnybrook, so participants don't have to incur any costs. And all our participants receive a quarterly newsletter. So in this newsletter, we provide updates on the study, as well as educating about different aspects of dementia, as well as the most current literature in the field. So new treatments for Alzheimer's disease, blood tests for Alzheimer's disease, and so on. And finally, once we have study results, they will be shared with the community. And one platform that we hope to do that is through Cortex Conversations. So if you are interested in participating in the camera study, please do email us. Here's the lab email address, as well as the website for our study. And I'll show this again at the end, just in case you miss it here. And so just to wrap up, I encourage you all to consider implementing some of the lifestyle changes we've discussed today, if you haven't already. So I'd also like to make the point that many of these lifestyle changes are interconnected. So when you make changes in one area, it often positively impacts others. For example, engaging in physical activity also improves vascular health, and also it enhances sleep quality. When you sleep better, you're more likely to be physically active. Diet also improves your vascular health. Again, when you engage in physical activity with a friend, you're not only exercising, but also benefiting from social interaction. And this also, in turn, provides cognitive stimulation. So by incorporating these habits into your daily routine, you can really take a proactive role in protecting your brain health and reducing your risk of dementia. So please remember, it's never too early or too late to begin making these positive changes. And I promise you, your brain will thank you for it. So thank you for listening. Thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting us. And thank you to our camera participants. I know some are in the audience today, and happy to spend some time taking questions. Here's all our information. This is my personal email. Feel free to email me. This is the lab email and the camera study website. So I'll leave this up for a few minutes and happy to take questions. And I'll pass it back to Harleen at this time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Rabin, for that very enlightening presentation. I hope everyone probably took at least one thing away from that presentation that they could implement in their daily lives. And if not, that's okay. You could feel free to ask us more questions and we can answer them. And if you're also interested in participating in the camera study, again, reach out to either Dr. Rabin or the lab email and we will get back to you. So now I'll open the floor up to our audience. If you have any questions, feel free to either use the raise your hand function or just unmute. Or you could also just put it in the chat and then we can go through some of those questions here. We do have a question in the chat already. So one is about the recording. So we will